In the past few months around the world, many classes of 2020 have finally graduated. When their 4-year journey of high school finally came to a close, they found themselves in the midst of a pandemic. I was one of those students. Now, a lot of us have found ourselves facing many challenges that have been incited in the past few months, and have found things like our formal graduations being cancelled, and as a byproduct, even our exams. Now, as unfortunate as these circumstances were for us, we are not the only ones that will be impacted, but rather the entire education industry will be facing many changes and many challenges moving forward. Having recently graduated, I would have liked to take this opportunity to talk about the future of high school education. When we talk about high school education, it's very important to look at the purpose of high school education. And although it is very difficult to pinpoint an exact definition due to the wide number of goals that are different from teachers, from students, from parents, we can narrow it down to 3 main ideas. Academics, which is the oldest and most prominent around the world. Discovery, which is somewhat more recent, and it's the idea to allow students to discover opinions, values, beliefs, and then finally to develop those, all in the goal of preparation for the future. So when we look at education and the economy, although there is an impact, the larger impact is more indirect, and it is the idea that an educated population will create a more efficient economy. So in terms of workers that are educated, it's been shown that they're far more efficient in carrying out tasks than those who are not. On top of this, supply and demand of different occupations will rise and fall depending on the education of the population. So when we look at from the past up until now, we see a rise in the ideas of implicit learning, which is to learn in a more a hidden way, per se, in the sense that students aren't exactly being told that, say, World War II started in 1939, but rather that through reading a poem that was written in 1939, they learn about the context of that time, as in at the brink of World War II, etc. The second is the greater responsibility. So students are being given far more choices in terms of choosing their subjects, in terms of far more micro parts of their education. And then finally we have this idea of skill-based learning, which is far more application-based, and which allows students to learn one application and able to apply it to all other forms of that learning. So when we look at the current points of concern in our time today, there are 3 main ideas I'd like to make prominent. So the problem at the moment is that we are in somewhat of a gray area. At least that's what I think. In the past, students were brought up to test. That was their main goal, and that was the only way that they would really learn anyways. So for all the way from grade 1, probably, they'd be learning testing, examination prep, all the way up until the end of their education. But what's happened now is that we've learned that perhaps there's more we can give to our students in the education industry, and therefore we start to add this holistic learning from grades 1 up until maybe 10. And the problem is that once they leave that grade 10 and they head into grade 11 and 12, they're suddenly put into a different form of education, and it's the idea of testing and testing only. And all of a sudden, all these 10 years that they've spent in their other part of education has suddenly kind of gone out the window. They can't really apply that very much, and are unable to test well. The second is the one model approach, and this is the idea that every single student can learn with one model, which we know is not true. Everyone does not learn the exact same way. And on top of this, they also don't test the same way, which is also how we are carrying out our education system. And then finally is the idea of sustainability. So When we talk about sustainability, I'm talking about two main things. One is teaching sustainably, is in the idea that students are able to apply it themselves, not just have the knowledge, but rather aren't scared to actually use it. And then second is the idea of actually teaching sustainability to the future generations so that we may have a livable future. So when we look at technology and the impact on education, we obviously know there's a huge one, but these are the numbers. So 63% of teachers say that they teach with tech on a daily basis, and this was up from 55% just the year prior. It's a $350 billion valuation for the online education market by 2025. And at that time, the projected value of education as a whole is just under $2 trillion. So it's a huge chunk of the market. And then finally, upwards of 47% of learning tools will be handled by AI. And this is the idea where AI will take care of personalized education for individual students and things like that. Now, I'd like to bring our attention to the International Baccalaureate. And this is the program that I graduated out of. And it's widely thought that this is the most progressive program that is available. And the reason being is because it, as I'll come to later in more depth, it's very focused on the future, to put it simply. They're very aware of what is needed next and are very well adept in researching what is needed next. So when we look at the programs, they have four main ones, but we look at just the DP, the diploma program, which is the most popular one. And when we look at what the difference is between the IB and other programs, it's these five main things. The first is choice. So the IB offers upwards of 7,000 programs to choose from, and this has risen by 35% in just 10 years. The second is learning. The way that they learn is very implicit, as we talked about prior, which is a huge trend that has been coming up recently. And this is the idea where they sort of break boundaries between borders, or between subjects, rather. You will learn some chemistry in biology and vice versa. The third is holistic, and this is the idea that IB doesn't just take one exam and make that the only thing that matters for the students, but rather splits up the entire assessment criteria for the 2 years in many different sections across the whole year. The fourth is the deeper aspect of learning, and the IB is very good at this because they include things like the EE, the extended essay, where students can take a deep dive on their favorite subject. And they also have CAS, which is the ability where students are able to are pushed to do things that they normally wouldn't do, as well as do things like service, where they're helping the less fortunate. Sorry. And then finally, we have the future. And IB is incredibly good at looking at what's needed next. They don't teach redundancy. They teach exactly what the future is looking for. So what's next? When we look at the future, I don't want to just talk about the near future, but I'd rather talk about the impact COVID-19 has on the next 20 years of our lives, especially in terms of education. The first is distance learning. Now we know that distance learning is not perfect, but it is very much viable. And I think that once those hiccups have been ironed out, it may be far more prominent than it even is now. Why should I have to pay, a large sum of money to go live in the UK for 4 years, go to university there, when I could just stay where I am right now, save a lot of money, and do the exact same course that I would anyways. Now, the second is holistic grading. Now, a lot of exam boards have been forced to cancel their exams. So, for example, the IB has as well. And it means that they have to find other ways to actually grade their students. So it's not just the exams that they have in terms of the value that the students have taken away from education, but rather they have to find other ways of rating their students, quote unquote. The third is micro-credentials. And this is the idea of mini degrees. So instead of taking a 4-year degree in say chemistry, you can take a very specific part of that course that is only applicable to you. So you don't need to do an entire 4 years, but you could rather do 6 months, where you allocate your own time of when you want to do it. The fourth is artificial intelligence. So as we talked about before, it's going to have a huge impact in terms of learning tools. But the idea of AI is that it will take strengths of individual students, and with that, it will be able to provide a very personalized education to each student. And then finally, student well-being. I think that COVID-19 has shown us that this can be obviously a very stressful time for a lot of students. And therefore, I think that teachers and programs are going to look at ensuring that their students are less stressed in the future, even post-pandemic. Um, and I think that this COVID-19, as challenging as it is, will prove to be an incredible catalyst for change, especially in the education.